Hello and welcome to a video all about information in relation to building approvals, construction work and building certification matters that are relative in the documentation associated with this under statute law and other laws. Some key points on this video is that most residential properties will be subject to building certification matters regardless of whether or not they're new build or existing structures that have had extensions that require formal building approvals to be made. One of the biggest risks and problems with residential properties today that we are aware of over the last 20 years of doing inspections on them is the fact that over 50% or around 50% of the inspections we carry out on properties reveal to our purchasers and clients that there is uncertified or incomplete construction work at the property, which is illegal in its nature and can have major and significant ramifications for purchasers, particularly financially, and can be devastating on them. Because of this, we recommend that no purchase should ever go ahead by a purchaser on a residential property in view of the scope of this issue without a formal search being done by them with the local council authority of the jurisdiction the property is contained within, so that they are completely aware and concisely informed of what the actual legal formal records are of the property they're looking at buying. Because a lot of the times on the internet, the marketing that is done by the agents is completely incorrect and not factual, and the only way to determine the characteristics of a property legally are by doing a search with the council authority. This issue is actually quite astoundingly overlooked by most purchasers when we advise them about it. And in fact, legally, there's no protection in terms of the current contract used for the purchase and sale of a property. In fact, to go further, there's no requirement to even do such a search to validate what the characteristics are of a property, despite the fact there's such an alarming problem in the industry and area of certification for buildings. And it's also excluded, that is, building certification matters, from the Australian standard for building inspections. So there's just a real vulnerability for purchasers here, which we see all the time and really needs to be rectified and laws changed to fix this issue. So it's a very important video with critical information. So the first thing is to talk about the current laws and regulations. There are a multitude of them and different. There's building acts, there's codes. So there's the Building Act 1975 that started the process of mandatory certification. Before that it was council ordinances, but it wasn't really policed or enforced. From 1975 when the Building Act came in, it became mandatory for applications to be made on certain kinds of work and for certification to be done on residential construction. There's the Sustainable Planning Act, the Integrated Planning Act, and other legislation that comes into effect with construction is things like the Queensland Development Code. Design requirements within the code for the Queensland Development Code are for lots under 450 and over 450, swimming pool, fencing requirements in the Queensland Development Code, and also duplex considerations. So the Queensland Development Code is another area of legislation that comes into play with building certification. Other areas of legislation are the character and heritage, whether or not a property is subject to character and heritage requirements, the Brisbane City Plan, 2004 Town Planning, Australian Standards, and the National Construction Code. There is not always a requirement to have building work with an application be made to do building work. Obviously, where there's some minor work, there's no need to put in a development application, and that's an example that can be repairs and maintenance to existing houses. If you construct a fence that's less than 2 meters in height, there's no need to put in a building application to do that. There's a list in full detail contained within the Schedule 2 of the Building Regulations 2006, stating exactly what building work is excluded from the requirement to put in an application to construct. But basically, most construction work of a significant nature will be subject to the requirement of putting in a building application to construct that work. One other aspect that doesn't require an application is where you have self-assessable construction, and those projects or construction work is basically construction work that complies with all the codes and rules of the council, and therefore there's no need to put in an application and they're deemed to be self-assessable. Generally, as I said before, any major significant construction work under the state law and national and other laws and codes does require a formal approval to be put in place, but any certifier, when they do this admission and review of what you want to do and construct, can advise you in amongst this other research you can do. As I said, Schedule 2 of the Building Regulations gives a list of excluded work for more minor things. There's two types of applications that are given. One is a development application, for construction work, and that's in relation to where properties have some issues with the location of the building work, the block, the surrounding areas, the overlays, flood hazards and hill slopes, council character codes, heritage considerations. These aren't required for all building applications, and where they're not required, where they are required, the council must permit them for construction before any building certifier takes the next process and gives an approval for the construction to start. Where development applications aren't used, or DAs they're commonly known as, building approvals are given, which is BAs, and that's basically given to applications where no need for a development application is needed because it complies and it's not subject to any of the codes or overlays or neighbourhood plans, those kinds of things. There's many requirements that are generally provided during an application for construction or building approval submission. These can involve drawings, plans from the draftsperson of the work that's to be done, IDAS forms 1 and 2, engineering forms, surveys, certificate of currencies for insurable work that is to be done on over $3,300. So amongst other things, but there's a whole lot of things that you'll need to provide as part of a building application submission to your certifier, who's a private certifier, and then once the approval is given by them, once they review everything, they will submit it with the council authority, but it's all handled by private certifiers. It was outsourced, I think, in around 2001 by the Brisbane City Council. Once the certifier receives all the information from an applicant about a building approval request, if they are happy for it to be approved for construction, they will authorise it. They will also provide a copy of that authorisation and all the documentation to the relevant council authority, so they have a record. They're the legal bastion or record keeper for this. Despite the fact certifiers do the work, they must provide it to the council so they have a record and know what's going on. Generally, once approvals are given, the plans are given an allocation number or an approval number. The plans are stamped with a red stamp, approved for construction, and there is a 2-year period for construction given of that work. If there's excessive time required for that construction and it goes over the 2 years, additional extensions are needed as part of the law requirement. Once the construction actually starts after the approval is given, it is subject to legal formalities and requirements, the most significant under the Building Act 1975, and the most significant one of those are that 3 inspections are done during the inspection phase, all overseen by certifiers and involving engineers where footings are involved for the construction. So the first one that needs to be done is at the initial phase of a construction, footings. That's the concrete slab, the steel, the strength, and what basically holds the house up, the footings. Framing is the next one. That's the timber framing, the bracing and those kind of things that's done before all the linings are put on. And then the last one, which culminates the whole process and is critical, is the final inspection certificate. There are also many mandatory documents that must be collected by a certifier during the construction process and filed and submitted with all of the paperwork to the council and with themselves for record keeping. And these can include all the forms 15s and 16s. Form 15 is basically a form that's required to confirm that any materials given or provided comply with Australian standards, and Form 16s are basically a statement from the contractor that has done some work on a property, like an electrician, plumber, that they have done the work in accordance with the Australian standards and workmanship has been done properly and stuff like that. So they're the Forms 15, 16s. There's other kinds of documentations like energy efficiency and lots of others, but the certifier will collect all of those and basically have those at the time of the completion of the construction. Now, it's critical, and the process does not finish unless at the conclusion of the construction work, the building certifier issues final inspection certificates. Now, for Class 1 type construction, which is most houses and duplexes, that will be a Form 21, final inspection certificate it's called. For Class 2 type construction, units, dwellings, and where there's more 2-level unit and dwelling type properties, a Form 11 is issued, and that's called a certificate of classification. There is only one other difference to this, and this is for swimming pool construction, and for some reason, whilst it's still subject to approvals and inspections, the final inspection certificate for a pool is a Form 17. So those are the 3 forms that are required. Now, unless this is done for any type of construction that I've just mentioned, be it Class 1, Class 2 construction or swimming pool, unless the Form 11, 17 or 21 respectively is issued for that work, the building work is not complete and is deemed to be illegal and informal and very problematic for the property owner in case, who often won't know about this. It comes down to the builder and the certifier and the council making it happen. But astoundingly, on 50% of the occasions that we do inspections for properties on it's found out that the property in question has issues with building certification. Either it's a new building or existing building that's had some construction work that's been requiring formal application and approvals and certification. 50% of the time when a search is done with the council, our clients find out that no certification has been completed, and sometimes rarely that no application was even made and the entire construction is illegal and it's contrary to the requirements of the statute law. Most of the time they find when it's incomplete that the final inspection certificate wasn't done at the time, which can be years ago, and it's very difficult to try and get one after that process has been done many years ago. So it's a big issue. It's got major and legal ramifications, potentially financially disastrous for owners of property, and it's a very real issue that is in amongst residential properties, and that is that a lot of properties don't have the required formal certification for properties. So, in summary, it is one of the most significant residential construction problems that is available now, and that is no final inspection certificate is issued for 50% of the properties we inspect. Most construction work of significance will require an application to be made and go through a certification and inspection process under Queensland statute law, the Building Act and building regulations. There are many different kinds of different legislation applicable to construction work, residential construction work, acts, codes, Australian standards, National Construction Code, amongst others, Queensland Development Code. Some building work can be excluded from a development application or a building approval application. That can be minor work like fences under 2 metres or repairs and maintenance on existing structures. There are two kinds of approvals given, a development application and a building approval, each different in their own, because a development application is where properties are subject to certain codes and a building application is not. When work has been constructed that is subject to building approvals after all the inspections and process has been done, it must culminate with the issue only of a final inspection certificate, and 11 for units or class 2, a 21 for class 1 buildings, and Form 17 for swimming pool construction. Remember, 50% of the time this is not done, and that work remains incomplete or informal, not signed off, and becomes very problematic for property owners, particularly major consequences with assurance claims being rejected, the problem of trying to sell that property in the future, and also the problem of potentially never being able to get a final inspection certificate classification, because if it's several years old, it's extremely difficult to do that for existing structures that are built that are lined where certifiers can't see certain areas they need to get retrospectively on certification matters. This is a critical part of this video, and it's all in relation to the only methods you can determine what status a property has for building certification. So if you're purchasing a property or you want to know about basically what the status of a property is that you're interested in, or your own property, the only way that you can determine if it's been formally signed off and certified is by citing the documentation that I've mentioned. That's provided and all in accord with the legislation and standards, including approval numbers, plans, and certification form 21s, 11s, and 17s. That's also not foolproof. Quite unbelievably, we've seen fraudulent documents. They can be printed from the internet where vendors have tried to pass on as being completed, but it's not. So therefore, the only way and the best method to determine is by doing a formal search with the local council authority, because they're the only organisations that hold the records for building certification on properties, and doing a search with them will tell you exactly what is on their records, and that will enable you to mirror up what is on the property. So if it's a 4-bed, 2-bath being marketed to you, that's on the block, but on council records it's 3-bed, 1-bath, alarm bells should go off. You must rely only on the council records for what is actual legally in place. We would recommend that this council search be done on occasions also when you are given certification or documentation by an agent or a vendor, because whilst it's incredibly unlikely, it could be documentation that hasn't been, that's not verified, that's not truthful, it could be fraudulent, and on some occasions building certifiers might not lodge the final inspection certificate, and therefore the council haven't been given that information despite the fact the certifier did it several years ago. If they don't do it, the certifier give it to the council. When a search is done on your property, they won't be doing a search with the building certifier, private certifier who did the work. They do a search with the council, the prospective purchasers, and that will reveal no final inspection certificate. So that's why you should always do a search with the council authority, because they are the only ones that can tell you what status the building certification is for a property you might be looking at. Hope you found this video informative and useful. It is critical, and you should be well aware of it as a purchaser, because it will help you minimize the risk of sustaining serious financial loss on a very real problematic issue for residential properties. Thank you very much for watching.